This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, episode 679. What does next level teaching look like now? Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis. Today's guest is Jonathan Alsheimer, the unorthodox, energetic, and entertaining middle school teacher who refuses to live a life of limitations. Jonathan teaches at the world-renowned Fred Lynn Middle School, which was featured in the Relentless documentaries. If you remember, Jonathan was the teacher who forged a partnership with UFC Fighter and lightweight contender Paul Felder to help students believe in themselves. Jonathan loves to say that game-changing is not a cliche motto, it's a way of life. Today, he shares some tips about how to change the game not only for students, but for ourselves during this difficult season. Enjoy.
So today we're talking to Jonathan Alsheimer. He is author of Next Level Teaching, and he works with Principal Hamish Brewer that is written Relentless. And I learned about Jonathan because I always ask my guests, who's somebody you've got to get on the show? And Hamish said, absolutely, Jonathan. So Jonathan, we want to talk about what does next level teaching look like now? I know you've got a little bit more time left on distance learning. Talk about your situation and how you've tried to take kids to the next level in a very challenging time.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. Very good question, very tough question, because as we were talking before, there's so many schools right now that are dealing with an array of different difficulties. And the school division that I work at, it's an amazing school division. I work with some of the best teachers on the planet. I work with one of the best, if not the best principal on the planet. And even with all of the amazing things that we have and the amazing people that we have, we still have kind of that struggle with kids having access to technology or kids being motivated to learn. And honestly, next level teaching in the classroom is about what you can bring to change the school culture, what you can bring to change the culture of your classroom. Well, that doesn't end just because, the idea of school in a school building is closed. You continue with that same philosophy at home. And it really comes down to, number one, just building relationships with your kids on a level where you can reach out to them and just let them know, number one, that everything's okay. I think right now, too, there's so much pressure on educators to make education this people hear from every direction, you need to have your homework in by such and such a date. I've heard all kinds of stuff, and honestly the first step is building a relationship with your class and your kids and saying, listen, at the end of the day, I care about you, do the best you can. I understand, because the other thing too is we're dealing with kids in a time right now that's unprecedented. We've never had this before. Educators are not trained for this. And as educators, you do the best you can with what you got. And if your kids can get on and do Zoom calls, then you get on and do Zoom calls. If your kids, a lot of my kids don't have access to technology for a while, then you find other alternative approaches. One of the things that I did, I was creating my own videos on iMovie and uploading them to YouTube and posting them on my class page and, having things all kinds of different virtual field trips and links. But you go to the depths for your kids in whatever form or fashion that they need at this time. But at the end of the day, next level teaching is about taking what you have and just trying to make it a little bit cooler, a little bit better, a little bit bigger, or a little bit more authentic. And if you could get other people on and be a part of your calls with your kids or whatever, you do whatever it takes.
So Jonathan, give me an example of something that's happened in the last 8 weeks that you're like, okay, this is what I want it to be. I may not have all my kids here with me right now, but this is an experience that's worth having.
You know what? One of the most fun things that I had was this. My wife and I were looking at each other when we first got involved in this distance learning thing. And she's like, what do we do? I was looking at her what do we do? This is so unique and weird to us. And I was like, you know what? Let's turn our house into a classroom. And I even had my 7-year-old little daughter, Adley, and I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create, I told my kids, I was like, if the one thing that we were going to learn when we came back to school on a Monday was World War II. And my kids you got to understand, 7th grade American history. Kids, the very first day when they walk in, they're like, when do we learn about World War II? When do we learn about everything that happened in World War II? And so when we got to that time, my kids were like, no, I had DMs and messages and emails of kids that are like, no, we're going to learn about World War II. And I was like, you know what? This is what we're going to do. I turned my house into my own classroom. I literally had a sign that said, welcome to Mr. Alsheimer's class. And no doubt, here's the thing, with next level teaching, with anything, you don't have to reinvent the wheel or build rockets or anything like that. You just have to go and do whatever makes your class or your school awesome. So for me, I literally stood in front of a door and I had my wife hold my phone and I'm just recording lessons. And then I went on and screen recorded documentaries and had them cut into the video. And all this crazy stuff. And then I said, okay, kids, like at the end of it, what we're going to do is we're going to do a review game. And I had an interactive review game that they could play on their own whenever they wanted to, where they were going up, tit for tat against my daughter, Adley. And of course, I gave Adley like the cheat sheet so she knew all the answers. But I was like, asking, yeah. I was like, all right, now we're going to, and I literally used my phone. Like, I was like, what do I do to teach my kids in a way that, like, I don't want to just post a reading online. I don't want to just post, like go and write a reflection. Like, I was like, how do I take this to the next level? So I was like, all right, I'm literally going to take my phone, click on iMovie, and create a learning experience as if they were in my classroom. Because one of my kids, like when they're in my classroom, they know like it's high energy. Like I talk too fast. They'll even say, slow down, Mr. A. I get too excited. Like I'm crazy. You know what I mean? I'm on top of tables. I'm throwing stuff. I'm having a good time. Kids are laughing. So all of a sudden now when I'm at home, I'm like, all right, I got to recreate that. So that's what I did. I recreated it in my own home. And then I posted on my class page. And I had my daughter, I was like, all right, you have to get the answer before Adley. Here's your question. I'll just give you an example. It's like, what year was Pearl Harbor? What was the date of Pearl Harbor? Ready, set, go. And then I like had music playing and I showed my daughter Adley like thinking. She had a whiteboard and she was like, what's the answer? What's the answer? She knew the answer the whole time. But that gave the kids like a couple of seconds to try and write their answer down. And then I don't know if they won or if they cheated or whatever, but they'd have to keep score and they'd get 1 point if they get the answer right. And then they get 2 points if they beat my daughter Adley. And then I said, email me your scores. And it was just a fun way where they could get online and kind of get that sense of normalcy. Because that's the other thing. Like that sense of normalcy is so big for kids right now because they just want to have their life back. Shoot, us as educators just want to have our normal life back, right? Well, I wanted to provide in that moment and continuing to do so opportunities for kids to get on and be like, all right, this is Mr. Alsheimer's class. Like just a sense of laughing at whatever crazy stuff I said or laughing because they were playing a game against a 7-year-old, just having some fun, bringing that fun back to education, even at home during distance learning.
So here you have some kids and you didn't have all of them. How did you try to reach the kids who either didn't have access or did other things? What do you do with that part of your class?
I think the best thing that educators can do at any point, but especially right now in terms of reaching out to your kids, is just sitting down and calling them, making phone calls or sending emails. And sometimes I would send emails to every single kid that I had. And sometimes I would send multiples and kids would get them and they wouldn't respond, probably because either they can't access their own email. And that's something that we had issues with before we went on this break. So some kids are just like kind of left out in the open and you just do your best, call home. Sometimes our school has the right number, sometimes it has the wrong number, but literally it comes down to this, like don't stress yourself out, exhaust every avenue you have and do the best you can. At the end of the day as a teacher, like you look at yourself in the mirror, we say it all the time, Hamish says that all the time, like when you look at yourself in the mirror, did you do your very best for kids? Like that's a very honest and very easy thing to answer if you know you did it. You know what I mean? And don't stress yourself out. I think right now there's so many educators that are like so stressed out about making things perfect or I got to get to every kid. Like you just do the best you can. And honestly, kids too, do the best you can because this is something that we are not used to. So don't stress yourself out. Do everything you can, just like you would in your classroom. And at the end of the day, you can rest your head on your pillow knowing that you did the best for kids.
Okay. So when school gets out in a couple weeks, depending on the school, what's your encouragement to educators for the summer to prepare for whatever's next?
Honestly, I think it's just like any normal classroom situation. Like, that's a great question. I don't know if any school knows if they're going to be back to distance learning in the fall or if they're going to be back in the classroom in the fall. So I would say no matter what's going to happen, you got to look back at what you did. So look back at what you did in your classroom, look back what you did during distance learning and go, you know what, that didn't work. And there's a lot of things that I've done both in my classroom and with distance learning where I'm like, you know what, that just didn't work. That was too dry, or I should have done this, and then do it. Like write down a couple of things like, this is what I want to do in the fall. For distance learning, all right, this didn't work. I'm going to try this approach. Or if you're in a school that's using a new platform, all right, I wasn't very comfortable with it in May, but you know what? Over the summer, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to learn more. I'm going to do some training or whatever it takes. I'm going to call a friend or I'm going to call someone I know that at another school that's using this platform. Or I'm going to get on Twitter and social media and even post a question. Who has used such and such? Like for us, we're using Canvas in the fall. I'm used to Canvas because I went through my second grad course with Canvas, but as a teacher, I'm not used to Canvas yet. So I'm going to learn it over the course of the summer. I have a training on Monday. But at the end of the day, teachers, we just have to reflect on what we've done and think about how can I make this better the next go around. And it might not be perfect. It probably won't be perfect. But you just, again, do the best you can with what you got. Never settle for anything less than your best. At the end of the day, if you did the best you could, and if you went back and you tried to make changes and did the best you could, how can you not be happy?
So last question, fill in the blank. Because of distance learning, I learned blank.
You know what? I think because of distance learning, I learned just how valuable your last conversation with every kid is. You know, when we left, I actually flew out to Los Angeles and I spoke to a school district on a Thursday and Friday. So my last day was on a Wednesday and there was no Monday. When I flew back, all of a sudden, Virginia schools were out. And I thought back on the last conversation I had with my first period class, my second period class, that kid that caused a little bit of trouble in my third period or whatever. And I look back at that and I think, it just makes those moments a little bit more meaningful. And you can reflect on that. And that's serious stuff. Like with the last conversation I had with that kid, did I make enough of an impact on that kid? And I can go back to your reflection on the entire school year too. Like, did you embrace every moment with those kids? It sounds so cliche, but it's so powerful because you don't know what they're going home to. You know what I mean? You have no control over that. The only thing you have control over is your interactions with those kids. And to think like, what were those interactions like? And right now, with this COVID situation and everything that's going on, like I wish that I could just go and like give all my kids high fives and hugs and say, listen, y'all okay? You know what I mean? And we could do that to the best of our ability using social media, phone calls and emails, but that face-to-face interaction, that's not replaceable. It's not replaceable.
I think a whole lot of us have, I hope will look at life differently after we get through this because we will get through it. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's 10-Minute Teacher podcast, why not subscribe on iTunes? You can also catch up with Vicki on Twitter at CoolCatTeacher or level up and learn with her blogs and free resources at CoolCatTeacher.com. Thanks for listening.